Good evening. The only bad thing is that the first table is empty. They will say that this is a Catholic church. They avoid the first pew. Since they are videotaping me, so I'll stand in one place. I think it makes it easier for the videographer to do his job. The topic that I've suggested for this is called Wisdom from the Word, Biblical Insights for a Christ-Filled Marriage. So, trying to draw some inspiration from the Bible. Now, if anybody wants my notes, you can ask Beth Lukes for my email address, and I will send you a short abstract of what I said today, except the jokes, of course. A young priest went to his bishop and he said, "Bishop, I have such a hard time on Sundays because when I open my mouth during my Sunday Mass, my congregation goes to sleep on me. I don't know what to do." The bishop said, "My son, you should use the techniques of public speaking." He said, "Like what?" "Well, you should say something shocking at the beginning of your homily." He said, "Shocking?" "Yes. Then people will sit up and listen to you." "Oh, can you give me an example, Bishop?" The bishop said, "Let me think. Suppose you're going to speak about the Blessed Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. Maybe you can begin your homily like this. You say, 'My dear people, I am in love.'" People say, "What?" Then you say, "I am in love with a married woman." People say, "Oh, no." And then you say, "Her name is Mary." Then you speak about the Blessed Virgin Mary. Believe me, you'll have their attention. The young priest said, "Bishop, I think I got it. He went back to his church, and about a month later, he had an opportunity to speak about the Blessed Mother. He prepared this beautiful homily, and he was going to use the opening that the bishop gave him, but he was very nervous. He read the gospel, took one look at the people, he got more nervous, and he said, "My dear people, the bishop is in love." The people said, "What?" He said, "The bishop is in love with a married woman." The people said, "Oh, this is terrible." He looked at the people again, he got more nervous, and he said, "And I forgot her name." He had a lot of explaining to do to the bishop. You see, the beauty of our faith is that this God is in love with us. And because he is in love with us, he wrote us a love letter. That is what you call the scriptures. This is what you call the Bible. And because this God has loved us first, and he is in love with us, where else can we find better wisdom and insights for marriage and relationships than the scriptures themselves? As you know, the Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm going to take a few insights from the Old Testament and then a few insights from the New Testament. So let us begin with the Old Testament. The first book of the Bible, Genesis, you are familiar with it because as children we heard all those stories about Adam and Eve and the fall and the apple and all that. I'm going to take 4 insights from the first book of the Bible. What is the first insight? The first insight is this: marriage is a partnership between two equals. Marriage is a partnership between two equals. How did I get there? You see, it was not the feminists in America who discovered the equality of men and women. The first couple of chapters of the book of Genesis already assert that. The first quote, Genesis 1:27, "Male and female he created them, in his own image he created them." God created not only the man, not only the woman, he created both in his image. And so they are equal in dignity. The next, Genesis 2:18, God says, "It is not good for man to be alone. Let us make him a helpmate." The word used is mate. It signifies equality. God did not make for him a cook or a cleaning woman, or for her an errand boy or a bodyguard. He made them a companion. The word companion, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the Italian cum pane, to share bread with somebody. Third, the citation is Genesis 2:20 to 22, where God puts Adam to sleep and takes a rib from the side of Adam and fashions it into the woman. You remember the story. Now, what is the significance of that? The significance of the story is not to tell us that God is this great plastic surgeon from Beverly Hills, but to tell us that both man and woman are made from the same substance. So they are mutually dependent. So you see, therefore, marriage is a partnership between two equals. Partnership. Partnerships are hard. Those of you who have business and you have a partner, many times businesses fail because of egos, right? And marriages have problem with that. Unless I'm ready to die to myself, it is difficult to partner with somebody. See, marriage is a merger. Once you get married, there is no longer I, me, or my, only we, us, and ours. And that transition is very hard. You know, I came here 30 years ago, and when I came to America first, I was shocked to see children as young as 3 years old having their own room, which doesn't happen in many other parts of the world. And then when they get to high school, they lock the door, put a sign on the door, enter at your own risk. When they go to college, they have a dorm room. When they get a job, then they get their own place. But then when you get married, suddenly somebody else encroaches into that space. Suddenly the toilet seat has to go up or down. No, shower curtains have flowery patterns. Toothpaste is squeezed differently, right? And the problem is, who controls the remote control? And even worse, who controls the checkbook? You see, it is a difficult transition for young people to go from being alone, and in a culture where we are told to be self-reliant, independent, marriage, you got to tell another person, I need you, I depend on you. It's very hard. And then between two equals, many times we say we are equal in theory, but when we have a fight, I'm more equal than you are. See, to really consider that we are equal. And sometimes in this culture, just because we are equal, people think we are the same. Thank God men and women are different. God purposely made us different. Because a man brings something special into the marriage, a woman brings something special into the marriage. They make up for each other's deficiencies. And that is why it is called a relationship of complementarity. And sometimes in this culture, there is a beauty pageant and a guy wants to compete. Why? Do you know what I mean? We have to respect the fact that men should be men, women should be women. And that's what makes a great marriage. That's also what makes it very frustrating. So you see, when you look at marriage as a partnership between two equals, it has some practical implications. First of all, the first requirement in marriage is mutual respect. If people lose respect, there is no love. Do you know what I mean? How can couples put down each other in front of other people? You lack respect for the other. So that for me is the first requirement. Next, once you are married, as I said, it doesn't mean you are joined at the hip. No, there are guys, the woman goes to the store, he calls her every 5 minutes. Hey, where are you? When are you coming home? Leave her alone, let her shop. Right? Give her the space. Same way, the women may say to the guy, oh, now that we are married, you can't hang out with your buddies. Of course, he can't hang out with his buddies as he did when he was single, but he can still hang out with his buddies a little bit. You need to give each other a certain amount of independence. One of the great books that came out in the 1940s, 50s, it was written by a Middle Eastern mystic called Khalil Gibran. It's called The Prophet. There he has a line in his chapter on marriage. He says, let there be spaces in your togetherness. You need to give each other space. Third, you need to determine what roles you will play in the marriage before you get married. You see, in the traditional societies, the roles were well defined. In America, no. So, who will cook, who will clean, who will do the laundry, who will balance the checkbook? You got to talk about those things as couples. If that doesn't happen, what happens is that many things will not be done and people get frustrated. Or one people will do too much and they will feel resentful. And the last implication is, always remember that you are on the same team. You're on the same team. You're partners. Especially when we have a conflict, it's easy to look on the other person as the adversary, as the enemy, because you're blocking me. I can't get what I want. To remember, we are on the same team. So here is the first insight. Marriage is a partnership between two equals. You know, there was a guy who was not very assertive in his marriage, so he went for a special training. And he came back home, and as he came home, he stood at the door, and he raised his voice. And he said, "Hey woman, do you know who's going to be in charge around here from today?" She said, "Who?" He said, "Me." She said, "We shall see." Then he walked in the door and he said, "For starters, you're going to draw me a bubble bath. And as I step out of the bath, you'll have a glass of champagne ready." She said, "Uh-huh." And then he said, "You're going to lay out my favorite suit and tie because I'm going for a night on the town with my buddies." And then he said, "Do you know who is going to comb my hair and adjust my tie?" She said, "Yes, the funeral director." You see, if people forget that marriage is a partnership, egos get in the way. So that is the first thing. The second, nurture your fondness and admiration for each other. Where did I get that from? When God brings Eve to Adam, that is Genesis 2:18 to 24, what happens? God brings Eve to Adam. Adam takes one look at her. He is so enamored of her, he starts to sing her praises. You know, he says, "You are the bone of my bone and the flesh of my flesh. You shall be called woman because I was taken out of man." See, here lies the secret of romance. See, when people fall in love, what do? They call anybody and everybody who will listen and rave about the other person. Am I right? When people divorce, the opposite happens. They can't say one good thing about the other person. Right? That is exactly the secret of romance. Nurture your fondness and admiration for each other. Now, one of the best psychologists, family therapists, or whatever you call him, who has written the best books on marriage, his name is John Gottman, Gottman. He wrote a book called 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. These principles have come out of 20 years of research on couples. So it's not something he made up. And he gives 7 principles. The second principle is exactly that. Nurture your fondness and admiration for each other. Unfortunately, so many couples spend too much time being negative, putting each other down, criticizing, finding fault. You know? You see, if you spend a few hours with the other person, you will find out all their defects, believe me. But marriage is about choosing not to focus on those negative things. See, there was a young couple that was coming back from their honeymoon in Mexico, and they were going to land at Albuquerque airport. And as the plane was about to touch down, the new husband looks at this new wife and he says, "Honey, now that we spent 12 days together, I got to tell you, I've been looking at you very closely. You have quite a few defects. In fact, I can describe them to you in great detail." At that point, the new wife smiled and she said, "Honey, I just want to remind you, it is because of those defects I could not find a better husband." You see, you know that none of us is perfect. None of us is perfect. But in your eyes, your spouse is perfect. Let me tell you a story that happened to me 15 years ago. I was called to a nursing home because a woman had just died. So I ran over there. I entered the room. There were a few people gathered. The lady was laid out on a bed, and I started to say my prayers. And I was looking at the lady, and I could see that she was in her mid-80s. She had lost a lot of weight. She had lost all the hair on her head. Her skin had a strange color. And I began to say to myself, poor thing, she probably had cancer. She had chemo. She does not look good. And when I finished my prayers, I was walking away. This elderly gentleman came up to me. He took my hand and he said, Father, thank you for coming. I am the husband. And then he said, Father, she's the only one I ever loved. I met her a few days after I left the service in World War II, and we have been together since. And then he said, Father, look at her. She is as beautiful today as she was the first day I saw her. He saw some beauty in her I could not see. Now, this is what you call marriage. You choose to focus on the positives, not on the negatives. I'm not saying there is no time to think about the negatives. Of course, you need to sometimes discuss those things. But you don't spend the majority of your time focusing on the negatives. That is how your marriage will grow, will be alive, will be vibrant. In fact, John Gottman gives a ratio. He says in a healthy marriage, the ratio of positive to negative is 5:1. For every negative thing you say or do to your spouse, you have to say or do 5 positive things. So that is the second thing. Nurture your fondness and admiration for each other. Third, a marriage without God will become a marriage without harmony. What happens? You remember the fall when God tells Adam not to eat the fruit, and then of course they eat it. And then God asks, Adam, what did you do? What does Adam do? He says, Lord, me? I didn't do that. The woman you gave me, she made me do that. You remember that? Already in the beginning of creation, there was the blame game. If you really look at the story, in a matter of couple of paragraphs, everything changed. Just 2-3 paragraphs earlier, Adam is singing his wife's praises. Now 3 paragraphs later, he turns against her. What changed? Their relationship with God changed. Their relationship with each other was also damaged. See, many people think that we can build up our married life independent, irrespective of our relationship with the Lord. Doesn't happen. You know, if you can imagine a circle like the wheel of a bicycle, God is at the center and all these spokes are running, and you are on one spoke and your spouse is on the other spoke. You see, the closer you get to God, the closer you get to each other. The further you go away from God, the further you go away from each other. Now, I'm not saying just because somebody goes to church, automatically their marriage will be better. No, a lot of people go to church and they sleep there. It doesn't do them any good. But if people take their faith seriously, live by the teachings of the Lord, I can assure you they will be better individuals, better spouses, better parents. They will have a better marriage. And this is something people don't think about. See, I'm convinced, after working with a lot of couples, that marriages fail because they don't have a sense of faith or spirituality. Marriage doesn't work on the natural level because some of the most essential ingredients for a healthy, happy marriage do not come to us naturally. I'll give you a couple of examples. By nature, we are selfish. Am I right? You put 2 selfish people in a marriage, it'll be disaster. But who teaches us to be selfless? Not our culture. Our culture says, if you like it, you do it. You deserve this. It is our faith that tells us that I must forget myself, think of the other. The Gospel of John, there is no greater love than this, than for someone to lay down their life for their friend. And that's what Jesus did. And spouses do that for each other because they have married each other's best friend. So that is what I'm talking about. By nature, we are proud. If you look at our society, it tries to tell us to be proud. How self-absorbed we are today, right? Now it is our faith that tells us to be humble. Jesus on the cross. Jesus who washed the feet of his disciples. And that for me is the image for marriage. You become a servant to the other. The gospel teaches us that. Forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't come naturally. It comes from our faith. Our whole world is a mess because we don't know how to forgive. Am I right? Now, the last prayer of Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And the prayer that we say every day, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So you see, it is with a spirit of faith that we can really create a great, happy, healthy marriage. So that is number 3. Number 4, for me, is my favorite insight from the Old Testament. This is the one. Romantic love is foolish love. You can't have a great marriage unless you are ready to love foolishly. I'll explain. It seems in an Italian parish in New Jersey, they were having a meeting of couples, and they decided to do what was called, you remember the old game show, Newlyweds Game. You remember that? But they were playing this game with seniors, couples that were married for several years. And so they had this couple that was married 70 years or something. And so they brought first the wife, and they asked her the question. Of course, the husband was far away. They said, when was the last time your husband said, I love you? She said, 70 years ago when we got married. No. The last time. Didn't he say it again? No. Really? They couldn't believe that. Then they brought the husband over and they asked him the same question. When was the last time you told your wife, I love you? He said, 70 years ago when I got married. He said, really? He said, yeah. On our wedding day, I looked at her and said, I love you. If anything changes, I'll let you know. You see, that is not a happy marriage, right? A marriage without effort. You see, the example of Jacob in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. You know Jacob? Jacob was the grandson of Abraham. He was the father of 12 sons. One of them had a very loud sports coat with Donny Osmond. Do you remember him? Joseph? Okay. So Jacob, when he is ready to get married, what does he do? He goes to his uncle Laban, the brother of his mother, because he wants to marry his first cousin. And what does his uncle say? Oh yeah, you can marry my daughter, but you have to go and work with sheep for 7 years. So he goes off and works with sheep for 7 years. He had his eyes on the younger cousin, Rachel. But his uncle tricks him, makes him get married to the older one, Leah. And then he says, if you want to marry the girl you love, go back to the fields, take care of my sheep for another 7 years. He has to work with sheep for 14 years. Just imagine, Jacob is sitting at a bar in downtown Albuquerque, all right, with a bunch of his buddies. And he says, hey guys, I really love this girl, man. I want to marry her. I asked her dad for a hand in marriage. You know what he said? I got to work with sheep for 14 years. What do you guys think? What his buddies will say? Are you nuts? No girl is worth working with sheep for 14 years. Now look at this bar. It's filled with beautiful women. Look at that. That girl there, over there. She's only 3 months with sheep. Marry her. Do you know what I mean? See, this is what you call romantic love, foolish love. You don't count the cost. You don't keep track. You don't keep score. When you fall in love with this person, you say, you are all I want. See, when I came to America, I discovered that the major activity that Americans do, especially the American women, is called shopping. Okay? They work very hard to make money to go shopping. They choose special days called sales. They take special things called coupons. They never go alone. They invite their friends and family. They make it a day of it by going to lunch. And then at the end of the day, they come together, they open their packages and show to each other what they found. It's like the end of a hunt. And then for the next few days, they worry about the money they spent. And then they work hard to pay off the credit card bills. It's a major activity, am I right? Of course, it makes the men drive them crazy. Okay. But the thing is, it's not only the amount of time people spend that makes it major, but it affects your mentality. Why? From the time, when you are young, you learn that you have to be an astute shopper. Because you can buy the same thing for $5 or $50, depending on when you buy it and where you buy it, right? So, they tell you, you have to be very astute. So every time you buy something, you ask yourself, did I get a good deal? Did I do enough comparative shopping? Could I have done better? Could I have got a better offer? Now, unfortunately, this kind of thinking affects us in all areas of life. But there are two areas in which you cannot think like that. One is faith, where God calls the shots. Other is love. When you fall in love with somebody, you cannot say, did I get a good deal? Did I do enough comparative shopping? Could I have upgraded to a better model? No. You say, I love you and I want to make you happy. I'll do whatever I can to make you happy. See, when couples begin to ask each other, I did this and what did you do for me? That love is already in trouble. Am I right? This is what he called foolish love. Only when people can love foolishly, only then the marriage is really happy. Our world says it the other way. Number 4. Number 5, marriage is a sacred union. I'm going to skip over a lot of books and come to the prophets. You heard about prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Uzziah. All these prophets speak about many different things. But there is one theme that they return to again and again. What is that? The covenantal love of God for his people. Especially when you listen to Hosea, he will say, I have loved you. That is, of course, he's speaking in the name of God. He's telling the people of Israel, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I married you, but you ran after other lovers and committed adultery. You are unfaithful. I will be faithful. I will marry you again. Now, just think about it. If marriage itself were not a sacred reality, the prophets could not have used it to describe his love for his people. So, here is where you understand marriage is something sacred. What is sacred? Sacred is not something that is ordinary. It is something set apart for God. The church is sacred space. You can only hold Eucharist there, prayers there, is dedicated to God. In the same way, the union between a husband and wife is something holy, something sacred. See, when two people say to each other, I like you, you like me, so let's be together, it doesn't work. When people realize that there was something bigger than them that brought them together. I can tell you, every time I prepare a couple for marriage, I always ask them their love story. You wouldn't believe the stories that you hear. I was just telling this to some people. I did a wedding on last Saturday, and this boy is from Indiana, she's from Illinois, and they met when they were tubing on a river. Okay? And the groom says to me, because I read this story during the wedding ceremony, and he said, the water was muddy and filthy and a bunch of hillbillies floating down a river. And he said, I had a better chance of catching an infection than finding my wife. And he did find his wife there. God works in mysterious ways. And I tell people, you got to understand, it's not you choosing the other, but God choosing the two of you. And that is why we don't make a promise, we make a vow. Promise we make to each other. See, today people cannot even commit themselves to a 1-year cell phone plan. How do they commit themselves for life to another person? Think about it. Only God can make it happen. See, here is where my objection to destination weddings and outdoor weddings. See, when you do outdoor weddings and all those things, it's about you. But you realize it's not just about you. Fulton Sheen, the bishop, used to say it takes 3 to get married: the spouses and the Lord. Only when people have that vision that marriage works. That is why it is a sacred union. And those vows are sacred. They give me the motivation to stick with it, to persevere. Because every marriage goes through some challenge at some time or other. So you got to be patient. While the other one is struggling, maybe, to persevere and wait for them. See, Italians know that good wine is not made in a few days. Good marriage takes a lifetime. So you need that perseverance. So when you realize that marriage is a sacred union, then it works. Okay, the last one. There is a little book in the Old Testament. Very few people have read it. Hardly anybody knows about it. It is called the Song of Songs, or Canticle of Canticles. It's also called the Canticle of Solomon. Now, when you read that book, you say, "Woo, is this the Bible?" Because it is nothing but earthy, graphic, passionate love poetry. Okay? See, I'll read to you a few lines from there. "How beautiful you are, my love. How very beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats moving down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them is bereaved. Your lips are like crimson thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind the veil." I mean, this beautiful love poetry. And of course, in the seminary we had to study this, my professors told us that if you read the book in the original languages, you'll be shocked. Because they get into detailed descriptions of each other's physical anatomy. And I'm not kidding you. Now, what is the church saying by including this in the Word of God? The church is saying even the physical intimacy between a husband and wife is something beautiful, is given for the union of marriage. See, contrary to what stand-up comedians say, the church does not have a hang-up about sex. The church has hang-ups about the context of sex. When two people are committed to each other in what you call the marriage union, your sexual intimacy is the celebration of your sacramental intimacy in the church. Do you know what I mean? Your physical union is a celebration of the sacramental union that happened at the wedding ceremony. So this is something to realize. So God is not making a concession. "Hey guys, I don't want you to get it over with. I'm going to look the other way. Finish it, all right?" No. This is something beautiful. In fact, Pope Benedict, when he wrote the encyclical on the love of God, for the first time, he included the erotic love as part of God's love. It takes its origin, the fire, the passion. You see, sometimes in the Christian tradition, we have lost that. It is something beautiful. You're listening to a celibate, what the heck? But I can tell you a couple of things, okay? A couple of things. Number one, certainly the physical intimacy is an important part of marriage, but certainly not the most important part of marriage. Because there are other things that are more important. Your love for each other, your faithfulness, your trust, your fidelity, all those things are far more important. But it is certainly important. But you have to remember that it is more important by its absence than by its presence. What do I mean by that? If a married couple tells me that they have quote-unquote great sex, doesn't mean they have great marriage. But if a couple does not have significant amount of intimacy, that's a red flag. Now, when I talk to couples with marriage problems, after talking to them for about 10-15 minutes, I always ask the inevitable question, Can I ask you a very personal question? I say, yes, Father. So when was the last time you were intimate? You know what the answer is? It has been 3 months. It has been 6 months. They are sleeping in separate bedrooms. That's a red flag. The lack of intimacy points to a problem in the marriage. That's one thing. Another thing is that men and women have very different understanding of sexuality or sexual intimacy. Am I right? See, men will say, honey, I want to show you how much I love you. Let's do this. Women will say, let me feel completely loved. Then we'll do this. But the truth is somewhere in between. Because if the woman is going to wait till she feels completely swept off her feet, she's going to wait for a long time. But if the guy thinks that she's going to be intimate when she is mad at him, that's not going to happen. You better address the problem. That's one. Number two, I remember reading an article in the Reader's Digest 30-some years ago. Now, I read these things not for me, but for you. Anyway, it was saying that, from the perspective of the woman, if there is no love in the kitchen, in the dining room, in the living room, in the family room, in the rec room, in the baby's room, if there is no love in all the other rooms of the house, there won't be romance in the bedroom. What do I mean? See, the guy is ready for romance at the drop of a hat, even if he doesn't wear a hat. No? The guy can be busy with everything. He comes into the bedroom, he is ready. The woman, no. Here is one of Brittoisms I'll give you. Why is she called a woman? Because she has to be constantly wooed. She has to be constantly wooed. It is true. So you see, for a guy, if a woman feels ignored the whole day, she doesn't feel loved and she doesn't feel like loving. She has to be wooed. So to call her in the middle of the day and say, oh honey, I was thinking about you because this song came on the radio, it means a lot to her. To bring her flowers, not because it is the birthday or anniversary. No. I saw these flowers, they're so beautiful, they reminded me of you. Here are the flowers. Oh, you were with the baby the whole day. Let me take care of the baby. Oh, I'll cook dinner. You just go and relax. Let me give you a foot massage. See, guys don't need all that, but women do. This is what I'm talking about. See, being romantic is, you're learning from a celibate anyway. And the third thing is that, you see, we men, we think about how much money we spent on a gift and how big it is. And you see, so the guy may say, oh, honey, I bought this for you. I spent a lot of money. This must be sufficient for the next 6 months. No. She will say, give me something small every 2 days. For the women, it is the frequency. So, for example, she says to the guy, oh, you're the best thing that could have ever happened to me. I'm such a lucky woman. How did I get so lucky? Now, the guy will live on that for 3 months. But a woman has to hear that 3 times a day. Not because she is needy, it's because the way she is wired is different. So I tell my guys, my couples, I say, especially to the gentlemen, I say, you can never say enough how beautiful she is, especially when she gets pregnant. You got to tell her that. And I tell the women, tell the guy how smart he is, even when he does something stupid. Okay. So, all right, so those are the insights from the Old Testament. Okay, now let's move to the New Testament. I'm hoping that my time is there. Okay, New Testament. So let's go back to the story of Adam and Eve. So God tells Adam and Eve, okay guys, here is the garden for you. You can enjoy it. Anything you want in this garden is yours, okay? You can enjoy everything. But there's only one thing you can't do. What? You can't eat the forbidden fruit. Oh, there is forbidden fruit? Hey, Eve, there is forbidden fruit. And then God says, yes, I told you, you can't touch that fruit, all right? But why? Why? Because I'm your father and I tell you so. You don't touch that. Then God goes away. After 10 minutes, God comes back. And there is Adam and Eve having a break, eating the fruit. And God calls the two of them and says, what are you guys doing? No, we don't know. You don't know. What did I tell you? not to eat that fruit. Why did you eat that? I don't know. You don't know? God says, okay, as a punishment, you'll have children. Now, the first insight from the New Testament, what I would want to give to you is, in calling you to be spouses, God is calling you to be parents. Think about that. We say that Jesus came down to save us from our sins. He is the Son of God. He could have just said one word and humanity would have been saved. He didn't do that. Or he could have come down riding on a meteor like Superman. He didn't do that. He was born of a woman in a marriage and a family. By that very fact, Jesus made holy married life and family life. So, in calling two people to marriage, he's calling them to be parents. And that is very much in line with the Bible, because fruitfulness is what is celebrated in the Bible. You know, when God gives the first command to Adam and Eve, increase and multiply. And Jesus says in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, you did not choose me, I chose you, that you may go and bear fruit. And for a married couple, the most important fruit, significant fruit, is children. So, children are an integral part of married life. No? You can look at each other obsessively only for so long. Then you need to turn your gaze to this third person who is the embodiment of your love. Now, and I always tell my couples, remember, the children that you have are not your children. They are God's children. He looked at the whole universe and decided that you are the best suited to take care of these children. So God has already given you a vote of confidence, so don't doubt yourself. And of course, I also tell couples that children put a lot of stress on marriage, especially when they are little. So you have to be very patient with each other until they are out of diapers. Maybe they go to school, maybe. Then of course, other headaches come. But the joys, the rewards are priceless. So that is the first thing. Are you with me? All right, I hope you're not falling asleep. Because there was a priest once talking like this during Mass, and there was a gentleman in the first pew. He was falling asleep. In fact, he was snoring. And the priest was pretty upset. He called one of the ushers and said, hey, wake him up. And the usher said, no, Father. He said, what do you mean, no, Father? He said, Father, it's not fair. He said, what do you mean, not fair? He said, Father, you put him to sleep, you wake him up. So, okay. Now, in the New Testament, there are so many references to love. You know that. Love is like this, love this. All those things apply to marital love also. But I want all of you to remember just one reference to love, which is in John's Gospel, chapter 15, verse 12, where Jesus says, this is my commandment, love one another as I have loved you. See, the criterion, the standard, the model of marital love is Jesus' model of love. The way he accepted, the way he was patient, the way he was forgiving, that is the model for married life. He is the model, not anybody else. He is our ultimate teacher of the way we are supposed to love each other. Number 3, you know the story. There's only one place where Jesus goes to a wedding. You know that. Chapter 2 of John's Gospel, the wedding feast at Cana. You remember that story? What happens? They are invited to the wedding. Jesus, Mary, and the disciples are there. And Mary comes and tells Jesus, son, they don't have wine. And Jesus says, Mom, it's not my problem. But of course, being a good mom, she says, no, you're going to solve the problem. She calls the servant, she walks away. And of course, Jesus changes water into wine. You know the story, right? Now, it is difficult for us in America to understand the significance of what happened there. You see, especially in Semitic cultures, in Eastern cultures, Marriage was not just about the family, but it was about the village. It was about impressing everybody. Last year, we had the first wedding in my family, my brother's family. And I did the wedding, of course. I'm the uncle, so I have to do all the weddings. So, you know how many guests we had? You wouldn't believe. 1,000. Sit down dinner. I asked my brother, how do you even know 1,000 people? Even on my Facebook page, I have only about 700 people. And most of them, I don't know who they are, But the thing is, you see, in the Eastern cultures, you have to invite everybody. People would go bankrupt celebrating a wedding. Because you will get honor and recognition. In that context, to run out of wine would have been such a source of shame and dishonor. For generations in that village, they would have said, oh, you remember that couple? Oh my, they ran out of wine. Because at the time of Jesus, the couple was supposed to provide enough wine for 3 days of celebration. 3 days. So, you see, now who spared them that embarrassment? It was Jesus and Mary. And I tell the couples, remember that for us Catholics, the saints are our friends. The Holy Family should become part of your family because they will take care of you. Because during the wedding ceremony, the bride goes to the statue of the Blessed Mother. For what? To tell Mary, Mary, you're a woman, you're a wife, you're a mother. Please come and be part of our family. And she will take care of you. And the other thing is, in the Bible, wine is a symbol of joy or mirth. People get married to be joyful together, not to be miserable together. So the sense of joy you feel in a marriage is a symptom of the health of the marriage. So if at any time in your married life you don't feel sufficiently happy, ask yourself what is going on. Maybe you're doing things you should not be doing, or you're not doing the things you should be doing. But here again, men and women are different. See, men are minimalists. It doesn't take a lot to keep a guy happy. If there is food on the table, if there is a clean house to come home to, the children are taken care of, and every now and then his needs are taken care of, marriage is great. Women, not the same. Women are sitting and thinking, am I happy? Am I as happy as I should be? Am I as happy as my sister? Am I happier than my sister? Women are always questioning and doubting, and a man must address those doubts and questions. If he doesn't, he will pay for it down the road. It's true. I tell men to pay attention, to listen to their questions and resolve them. Very important. Okay. Number 4. If you have been to a few Catholic weddings, there is one reading you would have almost committed to memory. First letter of Paul to the Corinthians. I just want you to remember those 4 sentences. Love is patient, love is kind, love always forgives, love endures. First of all, love is patient. With whom do you lose your patience the most? Your spouse, right? Why? Because they should understand, because they love me. Also because you spend so much time with each other. And yet what people forget is that you show your love by being patient. The word patience comes from the Latin word pati, means to suffer. Patience is suffering. When you told your spouse not to do something and they did it for the 3rd time, you want to get mad, you keep calm. That is suffering. Right? Love is kind. What is kind? Sweet. Sometimes we are sweet to strangers, not to our spouse. No, isn't that true? Sometimes it happens. I remember 2 years ago, one of my nephews came from India to visit me. He's a doctor. And I was so busy with the parish, and finally he was leaving. So I said, okay, this week I'm going to take you to the city. So instead of driving, we took the train. We went to the aquarium, the museum, it's all in the city. And then he wanted to go to Navy Pier. I didn't know the buses. And so I asked a stranger on the street. And this guy said, oh, I'll show you. I'm going that way. So he walked with us, showed us the bus stop, which was quite far away. And then he waited, showed us the bus. He said, this is the bus, get on it. And I said, look at that. They always say people in downtown Chicago probably are not so nice. But he was nice. Then I thought to myself, he was nice to a stranger, then he goes home and yells at his wife. Do you know what I mean? Love is kind. Many years ago, I asked one of my friends after a big party, I said, did you thank your husband? She said, why should I thank my husband? We take each other for granted. You know, the Italians have an expression for taking somebody for granted. It is dare qualcuno per scontato. You can translate that literally as to give somebody away on a discount. So when you take your husband for granted, you are saying, my husband is for sale, 50% off. So, love is patient, love is kind, love always forgives. I'll come back to the forgiveness in the next one. The last one, love endures. Love endures. See, I tell people, there is a difference between the Eastern understanding of marriage and the Western understanding of marriage. So, for example, in India, as you know, marriages are arranged. Kind of your family chooses whom you will marry. Why do you think I became a priest? Anyway. But in the Indian understanding of marriage, it is more a sense of commitment. It's fulfilling an obligation. And so the collective is more important than the individual. So the romantic expectations are rather low. You come to the Western understanding of marriage it's all about the individual. And so the collective doesn't play very much role. You may tell your parents because you hope that they will pay for the reception. But you know what I mean? But really they are not involved in the decision. So the romantic expectations are very high, but sometimes the sense of commitment may not be that high. But what I tell my couples is, when you go into your wedding, you got to say to each other, this is it. There is no back door. There is no contingency plan. There is no backup plan. Sink or swim, we're going to do this together. Love does not say, I will love you for 3 years. I love you forever. Love endures. Okay. The next one is the idea of forgiveness. You know, Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 to 14, you know, Paul says, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Forgiveness for me is one of the most important, essential ingredients for marriage. You can't have a happy marriage without that. Because we are imperfect, fallible creatures, we hurt each other. So we need forgiveness. Now there's a story told of a couple that was married for 62 years. They had a great marriage, but the lady had a little secret that she kept from the husband. She had a little shoebox that she kept in the closet in the bedroom and told the husband never to open it, and he never did. After 62 years of marriage, she was dying. So she called him and said, honey, I don't want to keep this secret from you. Can you bring me the shoebox? He brought it over. She said, open it. He opens it. And he looks inside. There are 2 crocheted doilies and $10,000 in cash. And he says, what is this? She says, well, on the day we got married, I asked my grandmother for some advice. And she said, if you ever get upset with your husband, don't go arguing with him or fighting with him. Just withdraw into your bedroom and crochet a doily. And that's what I have done our entire marriage. The husband began to weep. He said, we have been married for 62 years, only 2 doilies. You are upset with me only twice? Oh, what a lucky man I am. I can't believe this. And then he said, but what about the cash? She said, oh, the cash. That's the money I made selling all the doilies. You know, when I was a young seminarian, okay? When I was a young seminarian, there was a movie that came out of the United States called Love Story. Of course, in those days, It'll come out first in America, it'll come to India 3-4 years later. But anyway, I was 20 years old and I cried through the whole movie. Ryan O'Neal, Ali McGraw, okay? And the billboards, you remember what it said? The billboard said, love means never having to say you are sorry. Who thought of that? Love means always having to, I'm sorry, especially if you're the guy. Yes? Guys have to apologize all the time because you need forgiveness. Now what I tell people is, why do people find it hard to forgive? There are a couple of reasons. Number one, ego. See, if people were humble, they'll be able to forgive. Pride gets in the way. Now the story told of 2 monks who are meditating in the desert in silence. After 15 years of this, one monk turns to the other and says, this is getting boring. Let's do something else. He said, what shall we do? He said, let's have a fight. And the second monk says, I don't know how to fight. Oh, I'll teach you. He said, look, here is a rock. I'll say, this is my rock. And you say, this is my rock. You'll see how we'll fight. He said, okay. So the first monk says, look, this is my rock. And the second monk says, oh, it's yours? Keep it. There was no fight. But in marriage, it doesn't happen like that. So the first thing is, humility is needed. The second thing is, people focus too much on the hurt and lose sight of the person. See, no matter what the other person has done, it does not cancel out and erase all the love you received and shared, all that you have put into this marriage. That one thing does not erase all that. And people get caught up with that one hurt. Now there's a story told of a man who had a sports car that he loved. And he used to wax it, polish it, any little noise, you'd take it to the mechanic. It was like his baby. And of course, he would never allow anybody to touch it. But then after he got married, he allowed his wife to drive it a couple of times. The second time she drove him to the office. But on the way back, she was involved in a fender bender. She got out and looked at the front part of the car. It looked like an accordion. She felt heartsick. She said, oh, George is going to be upset with me. And then, of course, the cops came. They asked for all the documents. So she opens the glove compartment, pulls out the documents. And all the documents are wrapped in a piece of note paper. And on the note paper is this message scribbled. It is you I love, darling, not the car, George. That is called focusing on the person, not on the hurt. You can replace a car. You can't replace a person. And we forgive because we love. For me, forgiveness is the most authentic, most gratuitous act of love. When your spouse hurts you, you don't have a reason to forgive them because they hurt you. But you forgive anyway because you love. And you forgive because our God forgives us all the time. The last reading is from the letter of Paul to the Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 21 to 33. It's a long passage. And this is one reading most American women will not even go near. Because it starts out by saying, wives, be subject to your husbands. No way. You see, I think it is a misunderstanding because if you read that entire chapter, Paul is talking to the church. And he says, as members of the church, what should be your attitude to other members of the church? He says, you should be humble and gentle. In that context, he says, wives, be humble and gentle towards your husbands. It means, husbands, be humble and gentle towards your wives. It goes both ways. In other words, marriage needs humility. Humility. It's a virtue that we have forgotten. Now, there's a story told of a woman who went to a flea market. She found an exotic lamp. She brought it home and began to polish it. A genie came out and said, Madame, you can ask for 3 wishes, whatever they are. And the lady said, okay, all my 3 wishes are about my husband. Okay. First, she said, I want my husband to have eyes only for me. Said, done. Number 2, I want him to look at me the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. Number 3, I want him to look at me lovingly and with full attention every 10 minutes. And I want him to take me with him wherever he goes. And the genie said, done. And she turned into an iPhone 6. You see how today, we are such a self-absorbed culture. You cannot love when you're full of yourself. Humility is forgetting yourself, putting yourself in the lowest place, being open to the other. And Jesus gave us the greatest example. And I believe that a lot of fights and problems within marriage happen because of pride and ego. And the other thing is gentleness. You see, if you go to your spouse ready to hit them because you think that's the way you're going to get what you want, it doesn't work because they put up a defense. But if you go gently, it will happen. Okay. The last thing is what Paul says to the husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Lay down your life for your wife as Christ laid down his life for the church. This is what is called sacrifice. Now, we don't talk about it anymore, right? The word sacrifice is forgotten. What is sacrifice? You forget yourself, think of the other. You give up something that is really yours in order to make the other person happy. And that is what real love is. See, if somebody is not ready to put themselves out, there is no real love. Somebody said, when the authentic well-being of another takes precedence over your own, then the state of love exists. So let me tell you a story. There was this couple that was married for 40 years. They had their 40th wedding anniversary. So they came home after the celebration. It was like 11:30 at night. And the wife says to the husband, honey, I'm hungry again. The husband says, let me fix you a late night snack. So he opens the fridge, pulls out the bread box. There are only 4 pieces of bread. Takes out the ham and the grey poupon. He's going to make 2 sandwiches. And then he cuts one sandwich into quarters, just like his wife likes it, and puts the plate in front of her, very proud of himself. And he's waiting for her to say something nice. She takes one look at the plate, one look at him. She shakes her head and says, honey, we have been married for 40 years. Why do you keep doing the same thing over and over again? And he said, what? She said, why do you always give me the heel of the bread? Don't you know that is my least favorite piece? The husband put his head down, said, I have to make a confession. I've always given you the heel of the bread because that is my most favorite piece. And I wanted you to have the best. Now that's what you call love. Now, these insights that I'm shared with you do not exhaust the whole of the Bible. Not even scratch at the surface, okay? But hopefully you have found some wisdom from the Word of God. All right? I'll leave you with one final thought. There was a couple that was married for 50 years. They had a big party. At the party, the lady got up and said, Jim and I have been married for 50 years. Yes, we had our fights and our disagreements, but thank God we made it. And then a journalist walked over to the lady and said, excuse me, ma'am, you said you had fights and disagreements. Did you ever contemplate divorce? The lady smiled. Divorce? No. Murder? Yes. You see, I know even healthy, happy couples every now and then feel like murder. But we make it happen, make it successful because of the grace of God. We have to return to the source. The God who made Adam and Eve, the God who brought you together, the two of you, He is the one who has to help you to make it a great success. So where else can we find the strength except from the Lord? If the Lord does not build the house, in vain do the laborers labor. God bless you.